chapter 14 is innate, so that's really what we're gonna focus on here. It's non-specific, you're born with it, it's very fast. So when you first get an injury or an infection, that's what responds. We had a ton of definitions. And a lot of these are kind of excessive, like sentinel cells. Well, they're really just talking about the white blood cells that are out searching around for pathogens or other agents. They're just using additional terms. And they use receptors on their surface that look for things that don't belong. Right? That's what those pattern recognition receptors are. They're just looking for things that don't belong. So there's receptors are proteins usually, so they're proteins on the surface of these cells. We talked a little bit about that first line of defense, your skin, mucous membrane, antimicrobial substances.
I'll put it up there.
All right.
Oh, it's
Can't
that.
remember quite how
No,
far we
it's
got. I'll put it over
I'm
here.
gonna put it like right here.
Where's it?
There.
Okay. All right. So remind me where we stopped. How far did we get on Wednesday? Were we about right here?
Interferons.
Yep, that's where I thought, perfect, my brain's still functioning. All right, so yeah. Some of the things we're gonna talk about, actually all the things. Interferons, which are proteins secreted by cells that have an infection with a virus. And it basically lets everything around them know, hey, I'm infected. And then they get dealt with. We will spend a lot of time talking about phagocytes. So most of the cells in your immune system really are just, they just send out a notice that, hey, there's a problem. Very few cells actually do any type of killing. And the phagocytes are the ones that do most of the killing. We'll then talk about the inflammatory response, which is kind of the whole response that goes on around an infection that brings in all of these players. And we'll take a minute to talk about fever, but we're not going to do a lot with fever. It's just more of a systemic response to help your body fight an infection. And so the inflammatory response is usually a local response. If the inflammatory response gets systemic, that's dangerous. So that should be local. Fever is usually systemic. Okay. So we're talking about our first line of defense. There's really two parts to it. There's physical and there's chemical. All right. Physical are just barriers. And we are not going to talk about all of these, especially the chemicals, because you've got chemicals all over your body that protect against infection. Right. But physical surfaces have epithelium. Your skin is probably the most, obvious one. Right? Your skin. But really, all of your internal organs are also lined with epithelium and especially with mucous membranes. And mucus, right, it's sticky. It traps things. And so that is a nice protective barrier to infection. So the mucous membranes, and it's really your respiratory tract, your digestive tract, your genital urinary tract, or urogenital tract. However they would do it. Digestive, respiratory, and I'll use how your book does it, urogenital tract. The main areas where an infection would get in. Microorganisms do have ways to get through this. The one that's always kind of the wildest, coolest, if you think of Lyme disease. Lyme disease is a spirochete. Remember, those are those guys that are really tight spirals. And they have a flagella that runs around the outside of them. And what it does is it spins the spirochete like a corkscrew. And it will literally corkscrew right through your mucous membranes to get cells. There are other organisms that release enzymes that will digest the mucus so they can get to the surface of the cells. So there are definite ways past this, but for the most part, this will stop most infections. That's our physical line of defense. And your book gives you a lot more details, right? Your skin is very tightly woven, it's covered with keratin, a nice protein that's fairly impervious. You're always losing your surface layer, so if something's attached to the surface, right, as those surface cells flake off, the pathogen goes with it. So your skin's a nice barrier. And then the mucous membranes, constantly being replaced, constantly washing things away, right? Urine's washing things away. Probably this time of year especially, a lot of us have mucus, right? Every time we blow our nose, we lose mucus, gets washed away. You swallow it, it goes to your stomach. The acid of your stomach kills things. So these all work toward destroying things. So I told you I'd give you some ways pathogens avoid this. So yeah, our spirochetes drill through. It's also why most spirochetes take a while. It's like Lyme disease, they generally say there has to be contact by so Lyme disease is transmitted by ticks. And usually the tick has to be on there for like 24 hours. It doesn't have to be, it usually takes a while. Syphilis is our other spirochete, and again, it usually takes a while for transfer to occur. The other way, common organism that avoids these mucous membranes is whooping cough. The organism is Bordetella pertussis. Bordetella pertussis, which is whooping cough. Cough. Okay. And so, in your throat, if I have a picture, kind of do. Not a great picture. So in your upper respiratory system here, right, there's mucus, and then there's these cilia that are hairs that are always waving the mucus upward so that these organisms can't get down to your lungs. Those hairs are on cells, right, and the cells are powering those hairs. Well, Bordetella pertussis infects these cells and kills them so that all of a sudden you don't have cilia pushing this mucus up. And so everything is getting down to the lungs. And that's why people have that really nasty cough when they have whooping cough, because that organism has killed those cells that power the cilia. So we're just going to say it kills cells in the upper respiratory tract. Now the good thing is once you get rid of this organism, your body replaces those cells and you're good to go again. But while those cells are dead, you have a much higher risk of getting pneumonia and other things into your lungs, which is why they have that nasty, nasty cough. So those are two ways organisms get past our mucous membranes. Questions on these physical lines? Okay. There's also many, many chemical that our bodies produce to protect against infection. Tears, saliva, urine, right? Again, things that wash things away. And these contain a variety of different chemicals. They contain lysozyme. Lysozyme digests peptidoglycan. So this is really good against a bacterial infection, especially gram-positive. Right? What else? You have perspiration, which is very salty. high salt. We saw how most organisms don't like that. Okay. Two others that are on the overhead that you might not have heard of before too much. I mean, we talked about peroxidases a little bit. Right? They break down hydrogen peroxide, and they basically make some nasty oxygen byproducts, making the area uncomfortable. The bottom one is actually one of the most important. The lactoferrin, transferrin, has to do with iron. All living things need iron for their enzymes to function. When you get an infection, it's really a fight between your cells holding on to iron and the bacteria taking that iron. And both your cells and the bacteria produce chemicals that bind iron. So we make lactoferrin and transferrin to help bind up the iron so the bacteria can't access it. Why a lot of people, when they're sick, they get pale, they might even get anemic because the bacteria is taking the iron from you. Other things we look on there, pH, right? Your stomach's very acidic. Stomach acid is great. Let me take a look and see what other ones I might be missing here. Acid, flushing, pH, physical, okay. Again, thinking of how organisms deal with this. Well, you saw Staphylococcus, Enterococcus, they don't mind the high salt, right? You have your halophiles here. They don't care. When we get more to virulence factors in one of our last chapters, we'll talk about proteins that bacteria release to bind the iron. So it really is chemical warfare between the two. But the bacteria also make iron binding proteins. And then the craziest one, stomach acid. It's actually an organism called Helicobacter pylori who secretes base and neutralizes the acid around it. And it will exist within your stomach. And this is the cause of peptic ulcers or stomach ulcers. Helicobacter pylori. That's got one of the cool history of discovering a disease organism. This was in Australia, and there was a scientist who was sure that this thing caused stomach ulcers, and no one believed him. So he worked together with his doctor, and he said, hey, I'm going to drink this, and I want you to determine if I get stomach ulcers. And then I want you to give me an antibiotic to get rid of it. And his doctor agreed. And so they did. And that was the evidence that got people to believe this was the causative agent. So, one of those crazy stories. But he could only do it on himself, right? It would be highly unethical to do it to anybody else. All right. Physical chemical factors, first line of defense. Questions on those? So, these keep away most pathogens. If everything's working well. You also have a lot of normal bacteria, what we call our normal microbiota, that are taking up space, using resources, just making the area unavailable to pathogens. And so it kind of gives you some examples here. This one's breaking down lipids, making fatty acids. E. coli is making actually antimicrobials in your intestine. Lactobacillus is keeping pHs low. Two common diseases from your microbiota getting damaged. One is C. diff. So people who take a lot of antibiotics, they kill off most of their gut bacteria, the ones in your intestines, and that leaves space for C. diff. Now, last study I saw said about 70% of us naturally harbor C. diff in our intestine. It's just in very low levels and it's not growing. But if you kill off everything else, then it has all the space in the world. C. diff is nasty. It releases toxins that actually perforate the intestinal wall. So the first thing you do is you get a horrible gas, right? You smell Clostridium sporogenes in the lab. You get gas that smells like that. You get diarrhea that is literally just water. And if the infection progresses, you will generally start getting bloody diarrhea as the toxins perforate your intestine. So that's the take-home message. Don't take a lot of antibiotics unless you really need them. Ladies especially, C. albicans tends to take over the vaginal area if the lactobacillus get damaged in some way. Especially in small kids, you can actually get C. albicans growing in the oral cavity as well. So if you've ever seen a little kid with white powdery stuff in their mouth, it's because their saliva is not acidic enough. And usually they don't have a lot of saliva, and then this guy takes over. It's called thrush in that case. So, your normal microbiota is your friend. Take care of it. Don't use too much soap that's antimicrobial too often. You know, wash regularly, but not too much. All right.
Is that like the microbiome?
Yeah, that's the microbiome. And you can do a whole class on it. For now, from the immune side, just take care of it. Okay. Second line of defense are cells and some cell components. This is a crazy overhead, I admit. If you took anatomy physiology, you already know this overhead. So our red blood cells and our immune cells all come from stem cells in the bone marrow. Okay, we call them hematopoietic stem cells, but I'm just going to say stem cells. Okay. And those stem cells are going to divide and diversify. And ones we are not going to really talk about are going to be the red blood cells. Right? Those are going to carry gases around. We're not interested in that. You get platelets from there, which help with blood clotting. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the white blood cells you get from this. White blood cells are known as leukocytes. So that's what we are going to look at. And we're going to look at one that's not a leukocyte, but only for a second. All right. We're going to get from here something called mast cells. Mast cells are in tissue, and they release histamine when you have damage. Right? You get a cut, you get a puncture, any kind of injury. Right? These are going to release histamine. And histamine basically tells everything, hey, there's a problem, get over here. Okay? These are in tissue. All right. We're not going to say much more about them. We're going to look at these leukocytes. Today, for our non-specific defense, bless you, we're going to look at eosinophils. Does anyone know when eosinophils numbers go up in our system? What do we usually have if you have a high eosinophil count? Those are your allergies normally. Around here, these would be an allergic response. They originally developed to fight parasitic infections, like protozoans and worms. And we don't tend to have those infections very much, so usually if we see someone with a high eosinophil count, we tend to think they have allergies. But when I say parasites, I'm usually talking about protozoans and worms. That's our eosinophils. And doing an eosinophil count is a very normal thing if you think someone has allergies or if you think someone has a parasitic infection. It's an easy count to do. We're going to get cells called basophils. You know what? I have specific ones for each of these, so I don't know why I'm doing it this way. So, there's our basophils. Again, they're kind of like the mast cells. Mast cells are in the tissues, the basophils are more circulating, but they're going to release histamine. Histamine, and these are circulating. Eosinophils are usually circulating, and they circulate in blood and lymph, but they can enter your tissues if they need to, if they get called. And so all these guys are really like allergy or initial infection response. So again, they don't fight anything, right? They're just calling in help. The other non-specific leukocytes you should know are the neutrophils, and these are the ones we really want to talk about. Right. Have you ever seen the video of the cell chasing down bacteria? Did I put that on here? Did I put this video on this class? Let's see if I put it on here. Is that only in my other class? Did I not put you on? Did I put you on here? One host defenses mechanisms. No, I did not. So if you've never seen this video, I usually use this video as a way to show how motile cells are. Okay, I want to make it bigger. Make it full screen. Little full screen choice. No, I don't want to sign in. Now I did it. If you've never seen this, that's a neutrophil. And he's hunting around those red blood cells for those little bacteria. So these guys are extremely motile. They're very, very fast. And they hunt down and they kill pathogens. They will literally engulf it and digest it in phagocytosis. And then he goes on again. Yes. No, that's okay.
Heather found out my widowmaker was not.
Your bike. It's crazy.
So, neutrophils are phagocytes. They're very motile. They're very abundant. But when their numbers go up, that's really the first sign that you have an infection, is when you have high neutrophil numbers. So, phagocytes, motile. And again, they're the most abundant white blood cell in your blood. They are the first ones that go in when something happens and starts cleaning up the mess. Right? So these are the first that enter damaged tissue. And so they're going to be from your blood, and they're going to enter damaged tissue, and they're going to just eat anything that doesn't belong. They'll even eat damaged cells. They just eat everything. Downside of neutrophils, they have a very short lifespan. They eat things, they build up a lot of toxic stuff inside of them, then they die. Right? So it says they live about a day or two. So short lifespan. But generally someone who has a greatly decreased number of neutrophils, that's usually the sign of some sort of blood cancer or other really dangerous condition. Questions on those? Okay, two other leukocytes in your first line of defense, or I guess it'd be your second line of defense at this point. we have, I'll put this. So circulating in the blood are things called monocytes. And monocytes can split or further develop into one of two categories. They can become macrophages, and that's going to be in the tissue. So the monocytes are in the blood and the lymph, mostly the blood. Or they can become what are known as dendritic cells. These are also phagocytes. So both of these will also kill infectious organisms, or macrophages will kill everything. These are also phagocytes. And so are these guys, but they play different roles. Okay. Macrophages are going to follow the neutrophils. So the neutrophils are going to go in first. They're going to clean up what they can. And then the macrophages are going to go in next, and they're going to clean up everything else, including all the old neutrophils. All right? So these guys also, they clean up after the neutrophils. And macrophages are better about staying alive. They're very good as they acquire all that junk and spitting it back out, right? Exocytosis. So they kick it back out. They make more digestive enzymes, and they just keep digesting. So whereas these guys only live a day or two, macrophages will live weeks. And the more problems that arise, the more the macrophages will grow. And if enough of them are within an area, they'll actually combine together to make what are called giant cells. They all maintain their own nucleus. They get to be this gigantic mass. Just imagine this guy here and put several of them together. They maintain all their own internal components, but they become these giant phagocytic cells that just hunt things down. They are not as motile as those neutrophils, though. They'll move, but not that fast. The neutrophil's the cool one. So again, you get an injury, neutrophils are going to come in first. They're going to be drawn by the histamine from these guys. Macrophages are going to come in second. Questions on those? The last one there are the dendritic cells. There won't be nearly as many dendritic cells. And they're going to do something a little bit different. Oh, here's right about the macrophages. Right. Well, they'll form those giant cells. We'll talk in a minute about what circumvents some of these. Dendritic cells are also going to enter the tissue and eat some pathogens. But what they're going to do then is return to the lymph and go to the lymph nodes, and they're going to present pieces of the pathogens to your adaptive immune system, which is really confusing. If you remember from the video, you had those receptors binding, and then that MHC, and then that other receptor came in. That's what the dendritic cells are involved in. So they're phagocytes, but they're going to return to the lymph, and especially to the lymph nodes. And they're going to activate the adaptive response, our B and T cells. Which we aren't going to talk about today, because those are part of chapter 15 in our adaptive response. They got the name dendritic cell because they look quite a bit like a dendrite from the nervous system. They have all these crazy arms sticking out so that they have the surface area to present the pieces of the pathogen. I'll introduce you to all the cells that are involved. questions on those? I want you to know mast cells, eosinophils, basophils, those are just our stimulating cells. Neutrophils come in first, start cleaning things up, followed by macrophages, which finish cleaning up the mess. When you get pus, it's usually all the stuff the macrophages have been spitting out as they clean everything up. And then dendritic cells are going to take whatever information they can find back to your adaptive immune system. And that's why your lymph nodes are going to swell. All right. So we're not going to talk about these very much. These are the adaptive immune cells. So B cells, T cells, they'll come in later. These guys, this happens within the first few days of an infection. The dendritic cells later on will activate B's and T cells, and they'll be very specific to any pathogens that remain. We'll also talk a little bit about these natural killer cells, which is a great name. Mostly found in your lymph, the natural killer cells. So these are known as lymphocytes because they're found in the lymph. Leukocytes tend to be more found, those group in the blood and tissues. Natural killer cells are going to kill your cells that are infected. They'll also try to kill parasites. They're not so good at it. But what happens with natural killer cells, and we'll look at this process later, is when they bind to something they want to kill, they release two enzymes. Perforin, which is going to put holes in cell membranes, so the interior contents leak. And then something called granzyme. Granzyme will go through those holes and into the bound cell, and they tell that cell to basically kill itself, to induce apoptosis. If you read your textbook, they have about 4 different versions of apoptosis in there, and I don't care that you know the difference. Just know apoptosis, cell death, we're good. Okay, but we'll come back to these after your exam. All right. So, how these things talk? Well, cells have things on their surface, proteins normally, sometimes glycoproteins, that are receptors. So let's just draw a cell. Here's your cell. Okay, to do our eukaryotic cell, and they'll have receptors on their surface. So they're going to have receptors. And receptors respond to the environment. Remember, receptors usually sit there quiet, and then if something binds to them, what we're going to call a ligand, you get signals inside. And it's going to have the cell create a response. So that's just like the mast cell. He gets injured, those receptors are going to tell him, oh, time to release histamine. Right? That's the whole ligand and then response. Things like histamine, they get released, are called cytokines. Right? Cytokines are, again, normally proteins. Don't have to be, but are normally, that send out signals to surrounding cells. We call them chemical signals. And we will talk just about a few different cytokines. There are hundreds that we know of. All right? But these are chemical signals, usually to other immune cells. Right? And usually these are local, but if you get enough of them, they can get in the blood and go everywhere. Okay. So these are the ways the cells are going to talk. Specific cytokines that you should know. Chemokines which are things that like say, hey, neutrophils, come swim over here. Call them further for chemotaxis, for movement. If you want your monocytes to start dividing and differentiating, you're going to use a colony stimulating factor. Division and differentiation. Oops. And the other one we're going to talk about is interferons, which most interferons are secreted by viral infected cells. Interferons, they're very short-lived. They're actually dangerous. They can actually lead to damage to our organs. It's like you will see these can be used as a chemotherapeutic for someone who has a bad viral infection, but they are very temporarily given. You don't take these long-term. So they're going to be local and short-lived, because they are damaging to organs. I know bad herpes infections, sometimes they'll prescribe these. Okay. Those are our messengers. Two more. Interleukins, which are just general messengers. And then a very, very specific one, which is tumor necrosis factor. Which we'll talk about with inflammation. This will be kind of annoying. If you notice, all of these have 2- and 3-letter codes associated with them. So when we find new ones, we'll do like IFN3, or actually the IFNs are alpha, beta, gamma, so on with Greek letters. Interleukins are numbered. So just what to know, if you see CSF, it's talking about a colony stimulating factor. If you see IFN, it's a capital. It's talking about an interferon. And again, those will be alpha, beta, gamma. Interleukins, those are IL, and I don't think we'll talk about those until after the exam, mostly with how T cells respond to each other. And then tumor necrosis factor is TNF, which we'll talk about with inflammation. Okay. And there are many, many more out there, but these are the ones we'll talk about. Let's see, is that a good place to stop? We'll stop right here. One last thing. So if you've ever heard about a cytokine storm, if you get an infection that won't go away, sometimes your cells go crazy and release a crap load of this stuff, and you get systemic inflammation and you get really, really sick.